Hi, everybody. I'm Dara Bergeron from Belly Bootcamp, and we're here for Whole Mama Wednesday. And today I'm here with Amanda Laird. Hi, Amanda. Amanda is a registered holistic nutritionist and also an expert in all things menstruation, can we say?
Yeah, I like menstrual mogul,
Oh,
but
there, that's perfect, menstrual mogul. So Amanda's practice is specialized in hormones and endocrinology, and you've got a really cool project, Amanda. Can you tell us about it really quickly? You'll do a better job of that than I will.
yeah, so in September I launched the Heavy Flow podcast, which is a weekly podcast dedicated to having casual conversations with a guest, so it's me and a guest,
Mm-hmm.
about periods, menstruation, and any other taboo health and wellness topics.
I love that. And that's kind of not so far from what we're trying to do here, which makes you and I the perfect match to talk about periods
Yeah.
today.
Your menstrual cycle is actually considered to be your fifth vital sign. So that
Wow.
means that it can tell you as much about your overall health and wellness as a blood pressure or a pulse can. Menstrual cycles are important.
Mm-hmm.
They are a very important indicator of our health,
Mm-hmm.
and it's and if they are met with that kind of like dread and inconvenience, like periods don't have to be that way.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm very passionate about that in my work as a nutritionist and as a podcast host as well, talking about
Mm-hmm.
that subject.
Well, that's really valid. I mean, I'm not going to say that I enjoy that time of the month, but I definitely can vouch for the fact that I know when I've got my nutrition, and not in a creepy way, but when I've got my nutrition and my head screwed on right, my period symptoms are generally easier than they are months where for example, let's say the period that falls right after the holidays, that one might be a
Right.
little heavier and less comfortable. So it is, like you said, a really good barometer for kind of how we're doing with our general health and our, day-to-day wellness, right?
Definitely.
Let's sex ed grade 7 do this
Yeah.
here. Explain to me the menstrual cycle in 60 seconds or less.
60 seconds or less. Okay. So, day one of your period, so the first day that you're experiencing heavy bleeding, if you have a couple days of spotting beforehand, that's last cycle. Day one is the first day of your period. And that bleeding should last anywhere between 4 to 7 days.
Okay.
And after your menstrual bleed, estrogen starts to rise as you get towards ovulation.
Mm-hmm.
And ovulation is when the egg is released from the ovary to the fallopian tube,
Mm-hmm.
and it's either fertilized or it's not.
Mm-hmm.
And either you become pregnant or you enter what's known as the luteal phase, which is the 10 to 16 days after ovulation before you get your next period. And when that's taking place, estrogen is coming down
Mm-hmm.
and progesterone is getting higher. A normal or a healthy menstrual cycle can really be anywhere between 21 and 35 days. We often hear 28 days
Mm-hmm.
as like the number.
Totally, yeah.
That's just an average. So if you look at 21 to 35, 28 is your average. And the real important question actually is not so much like how long is your menstrual cycle, it's are you ovulating? And ovulation is that super, super, super important part of that menstrual cycle. So knowing when and if you ovulate is a super important part of diagnosing the health of your menstrual cycle.
What are the signs of ovulation?
What are the signs of
I mean,
ovulation?
I'm not going to speak from personal experience, but in a
Yeah.
clinical sense, what are the signs of ovulation?
So, as that estrogen rises, you may start to notice that your cervical fluid,
Mm-hmm.
or cervical mucus, so this is often discharge, totally normal discharge
Mm-hmm.
that you might notice on the tissue paper after you wipe or in
Mm-hmm.
your underpants,
Mm-hmm.
starts to change. So, after menstrual blood, you might have some dry days, and
Mm-hmm.
then there is some like sticky, creamy
Mm-hmm.
uh, cervical fluid that
Mm-hmm.
as your estrogen rises, it becomes more egg white and sticky
Mm-hmm.
or stretchy. So egg
Mm-hmm.
white is really uh, the best
God, that
indicator.
nailed it. Like that's 100% what it is. And I've had
Totally.
clients even mistake it for incontinence
Oh,
because it can
totally.
be thin and sort of runny, right?
You can actually stretch it between your fingers the
Mm-hmm.
way that you
Mm-hmm.
would egg
Like
white,
that's
right?
amazing.
And
Yeah.
that's the cervical mucus, the fertile cervical mucus that you're going to have around ovulation. And then as estrogen starts to lower and progesterone gets higher,
Mm-hmm.
it turns into more of like a watery mucus before maybe a couple dry days before you get your period again, if you
Interesting.
don't fall pregnant. So that is probably the most like outward sign.
Mm-hmm.
Some women actually experience a little bit of pain when the egg is actually released from from
Mm-hmm.
the ovary,
Mm-hmm.
which is called Mittelschmerz, which means
Oh,
mid pain.
how
So
German.
mid cycle pain.
Okay.
And you will also notice a shift in your basal body temperature. So you can use something called the symptothermal method of tracking your ovulation.
So Amanda, what's the average length of amenorrhea after having a baby?
Okay, so for anyone who might not know, amenorrhea is actually an absence of a period,
Mm-hmm.
so not getting your period at all. And the answer to that question really is it depends. According to Tony Werschler, who wrote Taking Charge of Your Fertility, which is kind of the Bible of fertility awareness, any bleeding that might be occurring within the first 56 days after childbirth should be considered the lochia bleeding,
Mm-hmm.
and any bleeding after 56 days would be considered a sign that ovulation has returned and that you are returning to your cycle. Now, a few things are going to impact that, right? First of all, there's breastfeeding.
Mm-hmm.
So, when we are breastfeeding, our body produces a hormone called prolactin,
Mm-hmm.
which it doesn't directly suppress it, but indirectly suppresses estrogen, which we need to get to ovulation. So, ovulation indirectly suppressed when we are breastfeeding. I just want to be super clear as well that there are exceptions to every rule. Like, that's how bodies are. Like, you can generally depend on not getting your period or not ovulating, right? Because it's not just about your period, it's
Mm-hmm.
about ovulation. When you are breastfeeding on demand, round,
Right. The
right?
clock.
So every 4 hours, including overnight. So
Mm-hmm.
generally, 6 months when babies are being exclusively breastfed,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
right, and not being supplemented with formula or at least not heavily supplemented. But one exception, again, to that rule that I have noticed just anecdotally in my own experience with friends and clients is that um, when people are bed sharing and they're sleeping with their babies and their
Mm-hmm.
babies are still nursing on demand even when they're older, that generally seems to suppress ovulation longer.
Mm-hmm.
Our hormones are very sensitive to what we eat, our sleep, stress, illness, um, even how dark our bedroom is, right? Like if you're
Wow.
sleeping in a room that gets a lot of artificial light, that can actually impair ovulation. So when you think about what life with a newborn is like, right? You're not sleeping all that great. You're probably stressed out
Mm-hmm.
because his nap schedule isn't matching up to what you read about in the sleep book, and
Yeah,
you're
totally.
likely not, eating your best. I know when my daughter was very little, I ate a lot of M&Ms standing up in the cupboard really fast before
Whatever
anyone.
you can get. Yeah.
Exactly, right? So our nutrition isn't always on point, and so those factors can also be contributing to a hormonal imbalance, which might also be suppressing ovulation.
How long did you not have a period after you had your daughter?
Oh my goodness. I finished my bleed after birth,
Mm-hmm.
and then I got a period like 6 weeks
No
later.
kidding. That's
But
super fast.
then, but then I didn't get it again, and so I didn't like. So I got it then, and then there was about 6 months after that. So it was like 8 or 9 months when my period like came back, like in terms of having a regular cycle. And of course, I got it the morning that we were flying from LA to Toronto after
Perfect.
spending a month in California, and my diva cup runneth over, and I like we had to like stop at this like on the side of the road at like this gross gas station so that I could like empty my diva cup, and then I had to go on a plane with a 9-month-old child, and it was just it was a disaster.
At least you were coming home. I didn't have a period for anywhere between about 18 and 22 months after all three of my kids. I mean,
Wow.
I'm an extended breastfeeder. And so for really like 6, 7 years, 8, 9 years, I almost didn't really ever have a period because I was either pregnant or, lactating and not having a period. So
Right.
when you talk about your diva cup running over, I'm totally like a 13-year-old all over again. Like I stain the sheets, I forget to pack tampons in my bag. Like I'm very like out of practice.
Yeah. My advice would be for people to start watching out for that cervical mucus, right?
Right, good point.
So your cervical mucus might not be as textbook as it would be if you weren't breastfeeding, right? So you might not see that same kind of cycle through from like dry, chunky to creamy to egg white to watery that you would be if you weren't breastfeeding. So the rule of thumb is to be
Mm-hmm.
watching your cervical mucus and look out for any change. So really what you want if you are, hoping to avoid pregnancy
Mm-hmm.
again at this time, is just watch for changes, and
Mm-hmm.
then when something it starts to change. If this would be a time to use another barrier method of birth control. And then you could also at this time start taking your temperature as well, if you want to confirm ovulation, right?
Right. And if you start to see that change in mucus, and best be making sure you know where your diva cup is or getting yourself a box of tampons or what have you,
Because
right?
you've got about 10 to 16 days after ovulation when that period is going to occur.
So if you haven't had a bleed yet, can you still get pregnant in postpartum?
Yes, you absolutely
Crazy.
can, because you need to ovulate before you have a menstrual bleed. So ovulation comes first. So once
Right.
again, keeping like watching for those signs of ovulation. If you are trying, well, I mean, if you're trying to achieve pregnancy, it's going to serve you in the same way, right? Then you
Yeah.
know that this is a fertile time. If you're trying to avoid pregnancy, then take proper precautions.
So you could have ovulated but not yet bled, and therefore there could be an egg waiting to be fertilized.
Exactly.
Okay. Which,
Exactly.
if you are currently bed sharing, sounds like the world's worst nightmare. I never did any of the tandem nursing or like bed sharing with two babies or ever had twins or anything, but one kid in my bed at a time was always enough. So So, Amanda, I can speak from my own experience, and I hear this from moms a lot too at Belly Bootcamp. Why do periods sometimes come back so fast and furious in postpartum? Like they don't feel at all like they felt before pregnancy.
So, this is actually one of the questions that I get asked most often as well. People often will say, after I have my baby, my period is worse, or I used to have shitty periods and now it's better. So, first of all, what part of your body went back to exactly the same as it was
Yeah,
before you
that's
had your baby,
totally
right?
true.
So, your boobs are different, your hips are
Yeah,
different, and so your uterus and your cervix are going to be different after you've had a baby,
that's a
right?
good point.
So, it could be a little bit bigger, and so it's like basic math. You have a larger surface area in your uterus, and so there's more lining growing that will then have to shed. The other thing is, pregnancy, childbirth, and even breastfeeding, these
Mm-hmm.
are huge hormonal events that are taking place in
Mm-hmm.
your body. So your body is just trying to find its way back into balance as things are shifting, right? Because once you stop breastfeeding, you're not making prolactin, your body is making estrogen again. It's just going to take a while to sort itself out. As well, our hormones are very, very sensitive to lifestyle factors like nutrition, sleep, stress, etc.
Mm-hmm.
So you're probably just like not living your most optimal
Yeah.
self-care routine
Survival mode, right?
when you have a small child. So there's also that. Another factor could also be that many of us were taking hormonal
Right.
contraceptives before we got pregnant, right? And so the bleeds that you have when you're taking hormonal contraceptives are often lighter, have fewer PMS symptoms.
Mm.
And so it's entirely possible that this is your natural unsuppressed menstrual cycle that now you're just experiencing for the first time since you started taking birth control when you were, a teenager in your 20s or
Yeah.
whatever.
So more intense periods are normal or changed periods. You said some women might have a more intense period before baby and then have a slightly lessened intensity after baby, which I haven't personally experienced. But and so what are symptoms that a period is not normal or healthy? Are there any signs or symptoms that we maybe should see a doctor?
So your overall menstrual cycle should be about 21 to 35 days,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if your cycles are a lot longer or if they're shorter than that, that's a signal that something is out of balance. If you're bleeding for longer than 7 days,
Okay.
if you have very heavy periods where you are filling more than 16 like heavy flow tampons over the course of your flow, you definitely want to get that checked out. And then the same goes with if it's very light too, right?
Right.
So if it's very bright pink, just, spotting, very
Mm-hmm.
light spotting, that could actually be a hormonal imbalance as well. If you get a lot of clotting in your
Mm-hmm.
flow, some clotting is normal. But if you have very big clots,
Right.
that could be a signal that something is out of balance.
Mm-hmm.
So you would definitely want to get that checked out. And I always, 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 always say, know your normal.
Yeah.
And whenever something falls outside of that normal, you
Mm-hmm.
want to get that checked out. And, if you go and you see a doctor and you're concerned about changes in your menstrual cycle, or you're concerned about your menstrual cycle and they're not, get a new doctor,
Mm-hmm.
right? Because, like I said, this is your fifth vital sign and it is a huge indicator into your overall health and wellness. So, you want to take it seriously.
Because your background is also in nutrition, holistic nutrition, you must
Yeah.
have some favorite recommendations in terms of managing the normal period symptoms.
The good news is, as I said earlier, hormones are very susceptible to food and lifestyle because the food that we eat makes our hormones.
Mm-hmm.
An important factor is blood sugar balance. And so making sure that our blood sugar isn't spiking and dipping
Right.
all throughout the day is a huge part of keeping our hormones in check, right?
Mm-hmm.
And the response that our body goes through when we eat sugar, we have stimulants like caffeine or alcohol,
Mm-hmm.
are actually governed by hormones as well. And no hormones exist in isolation, they all work together. So if you're constantly calling on your body's stress hormones to take out the garbage after you've been, on a coffee high or a sugar high, then you're crashing,
Mm-hmm.
that's going to have a trickle down effect onto your sex hormones as well, which is going to have an effect on your period.
Oh, that sounds exactly like a Christmas period, a January period.
Exactly. When we have a lower level of inflammation in our body overall. We're going to have less inflammation in our uterus and in our
Yeah.
cervix. And so it's just going to be happier overall. So inflammatory foods are things like sugar, caffeine, alcohol, packaged foods,
Mm-hmm.
um, all the things that are not health foods.
What are you talking about?
Um,
Wine's not good for us? There's a new study every week telling us wine is good for
very
us.
good. One of the most important things to do, and this might be surprising,
Mm-hmm.
would be to make sure that you're getting enough fiber and to make sure that you are going to the bathroom on a regular basis.
Well, if there's one thing I've learned over the course of these interviews so far, it's that poop is important. To
So
anything pelvic related, you gotta know what's going on with your poop.
hormones actually exit your body through your number two. And if you're not going to the bathroom on a regular basis, if you're not having a good full bowel movement on a
Mm-hmm.
regular basis, then those excess hormones are just kind of like hanging around in your intestines and they are going to get reabsorbed. So making sure that your digestion is on point. So you want to be drinking enough water, be getting enough fiber, and then getting stuff like flax and chia seeds
Mm-hmm.
into your diet, which not only have omega-3, omega-6 fatty acids, which we need for hormone production, but they also contain something called lignans, which are a phytoestrogen, which help to block any excess estrogen in our body. And that's often, excess estrogen can often be tied to PMS as well.
Mm. Okay, Amanda. So the market's changed a little bit since we all had our first periods, I think, and it was like burrito sized maxi pads or bust. So, what are your favorite period products that you used and tested yourself, or that you just recommend to people who are looking for a switch up?
Sure. I am a tried and true cup
They're
user,
amazing.
so I love my cup. There are more cups out there than the Diva
Hmm.
cup. Diva cup has just kind of become the Kleenex
Yes,
of menstrual cups, and a great resource is putacupinit.com,
great.
and they have a quiz that can actually take you through a series of questions asking you about like, have you given birth, like what is your period like, and they will give you a spot on recommendation for a cup that will work for you.
Pun intended,
um,
of course. Yeah.
Exactly. The other thing as well that is like super hot and cool these days is period panties.
Hmm.
Period panties are underwear that have either, an extra, like basically they have a built-in pad.
Hmm.
Sometimes the pad is removable and you just rinse it out and then you wash it with your laundry, and you can reuse it. I know some people find if they have a heavier flow that it's not enough protection and it can get like cold and wet sitting next to your skin, but
E.
it's great for a lighter day or it's great for backup protection
Oh,
as
that's
well.
a great idea. And maybe good for that kind of first day when you know it's coming, but you're not quite ready to go full on into your
Totally,
bleed,
totally.
right?
Yeah, like you don't want to be walking around with a tampon all day, but you know you're going to be getting your period at some point
Yeah,
that day. Period panties are perfect for that.
totally.
There's also a ton of just reusable cotton menstrual pads out
Hmm.
there that you wear just like a regular pad, but they're made of cotton. They're super absorbent. They're often in like super soft fabrics, cool patterns and colors. And that will make sure that you're not getting any like gross dyes or bleaches or chemicals like next to your very sensitive areas.
And I'm like having flashbacks to sort of like the whole, like the belt with the clips.
Yeah, yeah, like where yes, yes,
So we've gone past that. These reusable pads have gone past that. It's a
yes.
new age. It's a new age.
Yeah, they
Okay.
have snaps, Velcro. They're very
Well, if they could
technology
do it for
advanced.
diapers, then they had to do it for pads at some point, right?
Exactly, exactly.
So, Amanda, if anyone wants to come find you after this talk for more info on periods or nutrition and periods, where can we find you on the web?
They can visit my website, which is amandalaird.ca. And I am at Amanda Laird on all of the social media platforms. So you can
Awesome.
find me on Instagram at Amanda Laird, Twitter at Amanda Laird, and you can also look me up on Facebook, Amanda Laird, and the Heavy Flow podcast. And the Heavy Flow podcast is available either through my website or on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, or wherever you listen to podcasts. You can download it.
Amazing. Well, this is really informative, and I kind of wish that this interview had happened 10 years ago before I ever had a kid. So
Yeah.
I hope this helps lots of mamas. Thanks so much, Amanda.
Thanks. My
Thanks.
pleasure.
Bye.
Bye.